The line on the wall display read 6 minutes. I was already past it when Director Solving Threll stopped pretending to read his tablet. I let the mask's regulator click down another notch, a partial pressure equivalent of a thin mountain summit, then a colder ocean trench of thin air, then something my body had no business tolerating at all, and kept nomming the numbers on the panel in front of me because that was the test. Name the numbers. Stay coherent. Don't let your hands drift on the stick. 640, I said, still reading clean. Chief Flight Surgeon Emeth Calrow leaned toward her console, 4 fingers spread across the readout like she could hold the numbers still by touch. Cognitive markers are flat. No degradation curve at all. She said it the way you'd report a fire that wasn't spreading the way fires spread. I'd been brought up to Kessenroot Station 11 days earlier as a qualification candidate for the Combine's new orbital insertion contract. The kind of seat that needed a pilot who could hold a console through a depressurization event long enough to save the ship instead of just dying with it. Their model said 6 minutes was the wall. Past 6 minutes, human cerebral tissue should have been shutting down non-essential function, then losing motor control, then losing consciousness in that order on that schedule, the way it did for every species they'd certified before. I crossed 8 minutes nomming prime numbers backward. Threll finally set the tablet down, paused the run. I'm fine, I said. That's not the concern, Calrow said, not looking up. The concern is that you should not be fine. They pulled the mask, logged me, fed me oxygen I didn't feel like I needed, and argued in their own language for 11 minutes while I sat on the gurney swinging my legs like a kid waiting outside a principal's office. Engineer Dasan Oru kept replaying my readout on the wall display, dragging the Blackout's onset line further right with 2 fingers, watching it not catch up to anything. Run it again, Threll said finally. 8 minutes. Add the rotational load this time. If the result holds under combined stress, we revise the certification baseline. I want to be clear that I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just wasn't losing. The second pass put me in the centrifuge ring with the mask still on, spinning a load profile meant to simulate a tumbling re-entry, the kind of compound stress that was supposed to shave a full 90 seconds off anyone's hypoxic tolerance, because now my blood had 2 problems instead of 1. I felt the pull drag at my face, felt my vision narrow at the edges the way it's supposed to when the vessels in your eyes are the first thing to complain. I narrated anyway. Numbers, then letters, then the names of every captain I'd flown under, going back as far as I could remember them. 8 minutes came and went. Cognitive markers, Calrow said, and her voice had changed register, gone flatter, the way people go flat when they're trying very hard not to sound alarmed. Still flat, reflexes within 0.1 of baseline. 10 minutes, Threll said. Hold the rotational load, add the thermal variance. I heard Oru say something under his breath that the translator didn't bother rendering, which meant it wasn't meant to be heard at all. Between the second and third pass they brought in a 4th observer, a woman in a board director's collar I hadn't seen before, who stood at the back of the gallery with her arms folded and watched the readout the way you watch something that might still bite. Threll introduced her only as qualification oversight. She didn't introduce herself at all. She asked Calrow one question: has the model ever been wrong like this before? And Calrow's answer, not on a human, seemed to be the only answer anyone in that room had left. By 10 minutes the line on the wall had been redrawn 3 times, and nobody in that room was pretending it was a fluke anymore. Calrow kept her hand near the emergency cutoff like it was something she needed to touch to believe it was still there. I could feel my pulse working harder than it should, could feel the cold creeping in at my fingertips where the blood was pulling back toward the organs that mattered, all the things a body is supposed to do when it's running out of air. None of it touched the part of me doing the counting. 1103, I said, somewhere past the prime numbers, into a string of digits that didn't mean anything except that I could still produce them in order. That's not a number she needs to be reading, Oru said. That's the chamber's internal pressure variance log. She's reading raw telemetry off a side display she was never trained on. Nobody answered him for a few seconds. Pause it, Threll said. Pause the run. This time I didn't argue. They pulled me out slower, checked my pupils, checked my hands for the tremor that should have shown up an hour ago, found nothing. Calro sat across from me afterward with a stylus she wasn't using and asked, carefully, like she expected the question to upset me, whether I had ever lost consciousness from oxygen deprivation. Training, accident, anything. Once, I said, pool when I was 9. My brother pulled me out. I threw up and went back in 20 minutes later. And since? No. You understand, she said, that the line we test to is supposed to be conservative. We build in margin. The margin is supposed to be the part that never gets used. I understand you keep moving it, I said. I'm not doing that on purpose. She looked at me for a long moment like she was deciding whether to believe that, and then like she'd decided it was worse if she did. The final pass, they didn't call a test. Threll called it a calibration run, which I understood by then was the word they used when they no longer expected the subject to fail, and needed a polite way to keep running the equipment until something did. Full rotational load, full thermal variance, hypoxia stepped down past anything in their reference tables. Mask regulator clicking to settings, I don't think had names anymore. Just numbers with warning color codes attached. I went past 14 minutes reciting the names of the dead, every crewmate I'd lost in 11 years of flying, in order, because it was the longest list I had, and I wasn't going to run out of numbers before they ran out of nerve. Somewhere past the 13-minute mark, I heard the oversight director ask, quietly, whether anyone in the gallery intended to stop the run before the equipment did. Nobody answered her either. At 14 minutes and 40 seconds, the chamber itself threw a fault, not me, the rig. The regulator hit its own lower limit. The rotational drive flagged a bearing tolerance it wasn't rated to sustain that long, and the whole system shut down around me before my blood ever did. I sat there in the sudden quiet with the mask still on, breathing thin recycled air, watching 3 alien faces on the other side of the glass look at a readout that had simply stopped being useful to them. The chamber failed before she did, Oru said, very quietly, into a room that didn't need him to say it out loud. Threll closed the file himself. Not Calro, not Oru, the director, personally, with the kind of care people use when they're putting something dangerous back in a box. He didn't revise the baseline a 6th time. He struck the entire metric from my qualification packet and replaced it with a single line. Subject's tolerance threshold could not be established under available test conditions. The oversight director read it over his shoulder before it was sealed and said nothing at all, which I came to understand later was its own kind of verdict. The kind you don't put a number on because a number would make it sound like something with an edge to it. I read it later off the printed copy they gave me, sitting in the berth they'd assigned me on Kessenroute with my hands finally, privately, shaking the way they hadn't let themselves shake in the chamber. It wasn't fear. It was just what a body does after, once it's allowed to. Calro found me in the corridor the next morning before my transport out. She didn't ask how I felt. She asked, instead, what I'd been thinking about those last 2 minutes before the chamber failed. What kept the numbers coming when there was nothing left to count toward? Nothing, I told her. I just wasn't done yet. She didn't have a place on the form for that answer. She wrote it down anyway in the margin, where the margin was supposed to be the part that never got used.